A person often thinks that he lives within a space that is unchanging, that the nature around him is merely a stage set that shifts as he moves through his own thoughts, habits, and worries. But as soon as one pauses for a moment and allows the eyes and soul to open to quieter, slower currents, something entirely different can be perceived. That it is not he who passes through the year, but the year that passes through him. That he is not the one standing before nature as an observer, but nature breathes within him, expands and contracts him, fills and empties him, carrying him like an invisible rhythm that becomes so natural that it ceases to be noticed. In this lies the first secret. A person thinks he possesses his mood, but in truth, his mood is carried by a much greater process, the same one that sets into motion the budding of spring, the July light, and the stillness of a December night. When Steiner speaks of the earth, he does not mean a dead planet. For him, the earth is a being whose life is deeply permeated with spiritual forces. Just as a human being has breath, so too does the earth have its own breathing, but it lasts an entire year. In winter, the earth inhales, drawing forces into its depths, gathering the streams of life inward, as if wishing to hold within itself a quiet, collected light that cannot be seen from the outside. In summer, it exhales, expanding toward the cosmos, opening like a flower to great cosmic powers. And this great inhalation and exhalation is not something that happens outside the human being. It is a movement that his own soul constantly feels, even when he is unaware of it. A person thinks he is the one who changes his moods, but in reality, the earth transforms its own phases of life through him. In the depths of winter, when nature withdraws and covers itself in silence, the human being also retreats inwardly. Thoughts grow quieter, feelings become deeper, and the will gathers itself. It is as if the soul then has the chance to touch its own core, that quiet spark which easily gets lost in the noisier months. From this silence, something is born that is not external. An inner readiness to discover meaning arises. This is not merely a psychological effect, but a real spiritual fact. While the earth inhales and gathers its forces, the human soul too finds its way toward depths that otherwise remain more hidden. Hence the feeling that around Christmas, even among those who do not think in spiritual terms, an inexplicable closeness appears, a softer warmth, a sense that something new wishes to be born. As the year turns and the light begins to return, the first great expansion occurs. The forces with which the earth breathed inward begin to rise toward the surface. This is the moment when a person may sense new clarity, as if thoughts begin to brighten, as if feelings that were hidden in the depths now seek a way to express themselves. In spring, the soul opens itself to the world once more, not because it chooses to, but because the world calls to it from within. And just as young shoots cannot remain hidden beneath the soil, neither can human will remain passive. It seeks movement, seeks decision, seeks action. Steiner says that at this moment, a person is most similar to himself, because he sees most clearly what he wants to begin anew, what he wishes to carry forward, and what he wants to leave behind in a past year of human experience. Summer is the time when the earth most fully exhales toward the cosmos, when its soul expands farthest beyond its physical form. At this time, a person often feels the expansion of his own being, a greater connection with others, a stronger spontaneity, a liveliness of feeling, and an easier acceptance of life. But according to Steiner, This feeling is not merely pleasantness. It is the moment when a person is most open to inspiring cosmic forces. In such an expansiveness, the soul becomes more transparent, lighter, as if streaming between light and warmth. This is why ancient cultures regarded summer as a time of revelation, a time when humanity is most capable of moral inspiration and of receiving higher spiritual images. And then the rhythm begins to change. Days grow shorter, warmth withdraws, and the earth, and with it the human being, begins its slow return inward. Autumn awakens in the human soul a quality of observation, discernment, and maturity. It is no accident that this is when one most easily recognizes what has ripened and what must be released. Within the human being arises the same force of discernment that separates fruit from the tree in nature. Autumn brings a first heaviness into the air, but that heaviness is not depression. It is wisdom, the awareness that every cycle must be crowned with understanding. Steiner says that in autumn, a person can most clearly encounter his own destiny, because at that time he feels most strongly the streams that rise from the depths, as if through him flows a current of past and future events. When a person observes these rhythms long enough, not only with the eyes, but with a heart that has learned to be sensitive, he begins to perceive that behind every seasonal change there lies a certain soul gesture. It is as if in each season the soul holds itself differently. In winter, it folds into itself. In spring, it awakens. In summer, it opens. In autumn, it gathers. Steiner emphasizes that these gestures are not human inventions. They are echoes of what the earth itself is doing. The earth itself passes through a state of inner concentration, then through awakening, then through an exhalation into light, and then through a return to silence. The human being, even if he distances himself from nature, still participates in that same breathing through the deepest layers of his being. This is why a person can never fully detach from nature. At the foundation of his being lies a rhythm greater than any individual life. But Steiner goes one level deeper. He says that in each season, the relationship between the human soul and the cosmic spiritual hierarchies also changes. In winter, these forces are closest to his earth, most hidden, most silent, as if guarding the seeds of the future. In spring, they begin to open their approaches to the human being, enabling him not only to feel new life, but to experience it as an inner calling. In summer, these forces stand highest above the human being, yet precisely because of that, they radiate most clearly. They are not hidden in depth. They are in the light, warmth, and spaciousness that inspire. In autumn, this relationship closes again, but not as a deprivation, rather as a preparation. The human being can think most clearly then because the light no longer floods his soul, but enters it as a quiet power of discernment. In the Sealand calendar, this relationship is described through 52 weeks of inner flow, a rhythm that, when truly lived, becomes like a spiritual pulse. Steiner does not give verses for enjoyment, but for participation. Each weekly meditative thought speaks of how the soul, in harmony with nature, loses itself in order to find the world, and finds the world in order to rediscover itself. It is sometimes expanded into cosmic vastness, sometimes gathered into human interiority, sometimes permeated by light, sometimes by darkness, but always in relation to something greater than itself. A person who begins to follow this dynamic consciously feels how his inner life becomes less accidental and more aligned with a higher order. In spring, when the earth exhales from its depths, a person feels as if a small inner rebirth is taking place within. This is not coincidence nor sentimentality. It is a real spiritual movement. And what is especially important is that Steiner points out that with this spring expansion, two forces appear. One that drives a person toward inspiration, and another that can lead him toward diffuseness. For when the soul suddenly opens, it receives much, but it can lose itself. That is why spring is the season in which a person can rise to the highest clarity, but also the season in which he can most easily slip into superficiality. It is the moment when the inner eye must awaken and take its place. Otherwise, the surging forces of the world will overwhelm it. In summer, when the earth opens most fully to the cosmos, the human being finds himself in the greatest soul expanse. In ancient mystery cultures, the highest stage of spiritual life took place in summer because it was believed that at that time humanity could most clearly receive the morally inspiring light of the cosmos. But Steiner warns, summer is also the time when a person is least capable of self-knowledge. For when the soul becomes too expanded, too immersed in warmth and light, it becomes difficult to see its own inner contour. It is as if the sun's strength blunts the sharpness of inner vision. Therefore, true summer wisdom has always been the wisdom of surrender. Not a surrender that loses itself, but one that, in complete openness, keeps the center of the soul awake. And when autumn arrives, the time of discernment comes. The earth begins to inhale, drawing forces back into itself, and at that moment a person thinks most easily. Not because he is more intelligent, but because the light no longer dissolves his inner firmness, but illumines it from within. In autumn, a person most easily senses his own biography, because the nature around him, with its fading colors, reminds the soul of transience, but not of transience as loss, rather as ripening. In this time, a person can most easily recognize which forces within him have matured and which must be released, just like a fruit that falls from the tree. It is the moment when the soul most deeply understands the law of rhythm that nothing can endure unless it passes through transformation. In the moments when the rhythm of the year turns toward winter, when nature withdraws and grows quiet, a person increasingly feels that the time of inner concentration is approaching. In ancient epochs, this period was filled with deep mysteries, for it was believed that during these weeks the earth safeguarded the seeds of the future within its own interior. Steiner says that this is the time when spiritual forces retreat most deeply inward, as if the light ceases to radiate outward and instead enters the very substance of the earth. In the human soul, this transition is felt as heightened sensitivity to one's own inner being. Thoughts become quieter, feelings more intimate, the will more focused. A person does not live outwardly then, but inwardly, and in this withdrawal he becomes closest to that which shapes him as a spiritual being. In the time of solemn, profound winter stillness, a person may experience something Steiner describes as the inner birth of light. This light is not physical. It is born from the silence of a soul adjusting to the darker surroundings. While nature loses its splendor, the soul paradoxically gains the space for its own brightness. In this moment, a person no longer relies on the light that comes from outside, but on the light that emerges from his own eye. This process is not a metaphor. Steiner sees it as an actual spiritual event, as the moment to which a person begins the cycle of inner transformation that will continue throughout the coming year. Here, in the deepest inner quiet, the possibility of change is born. As the days begin to lengthen again, a person feels a gentle movement outward, but it is still shy, hesitant. Just as the earth has not yet exhaled its forces, but is only preparing their emergence, so too the soul feels only a hint of movement, the first sign of what will soon awaken. During this period, a person is especially sensitive to inner decisions. What he sets within himself then, as a thought or intention, may later take on strong form. Steiner calls this the time of inward shaping of the future. It is no coincidence that people turn to new resolutions during this season. Nature itself prepares this stream. The earth, as a living being, begins to lift its inner forces toward the surface, and the same happens within the human being. In spring, a person enters a very particular soul state. The earth exhales, forces are released, and a human being feels permeated by this outpouring of life. It is a time when new ideas, impulses, and feelings arise easily, as if endowed with greater strength than usual. But Steiner warns of something important. With spring's unfolding come forces that can lead a person into dispersal. When everything awakens, a person too can scatter into too many desires, thoughts, or projects. Therefore, spring is a season that demands inner wakefulness. For if one is not awake at this time, one becomes like a bud that opens too early and loses its strength. But if one is awake, one can rise to a rare clarity, to a creative inspiration that is especially strong in these months. In the expansiveness of summer, something exceptional occurs. The human soul becomes more transparent, lighter, more open. In such a state, moral intuitions can be felt more easily, not because a person seeks them, but because they reach him more readily. In the ancient summer mysteries, the highest stage of spiritual instruction took place at this time, because it was believed that the heavens spoke most clearly then. But there is also a danger. In summer, due to the expansion of the soul, a person is least capable of self-knowledge. It becomes difficult to see one's own depth clearly. The sun's warmth makes the soul supple, but also less differentiated. Therefore, summer spirituality has always been connected with surrender and wakefulness. Surrender to the light, but wakefulness toward one's own inner center from which one must not drift. When the rhythm begins to withdraw inward again and the days grow shorter, it is as if a person slowly encounters himself once more. Autumn sharpens the inner outline, while summer's openness fills the soul with warmth-filled light. Autumn's inwardness fills it with clear light. This is the light of discernment. A person can best view his own path, his decisions, his soul movements at this time. Autumn brings the wisdom of time, for it tells that every experience in nature is a ripening, and that every ripening in the human being is a call to recognize the meaning of one's destiny. Steiner emphasizes, in autumn, a person most easily hears his biography. It speaks not in words, but as a feeling of weight that is not a burden, but truth. In the moments when the rhythm of the year descends more deeply into autumn, a person begins to feel a special force of discernment arising within. This is not rational thinking, but an inner clarity that appears as quiet knowing. As the leaves fall and nature becomes more bare, the human soul, paradoxically, becomes more filled. It is as if the outer world withdraws, so that a person can meet what he has carried within himself for years. This time bears a particular seriousness, though not sadness, rather a sense of truth. For precisely then, in the period of weaker light, the inner light becomes clearer. Steiner says that in these moments, the soul most easily recognizes the threads of destiny, those that throughout the year have intertwined with events, people, and experiences. Autumn is the time when a person does not ask what he wants, but what life wants to say to him. And as autumn shifts into winter, the rhythm grows ever more intimate. The earth inhales its forces more deeply, closing into itself. And the human soul, if it follows this movement, becomes increasingly connected with the silence of the world. This is not ordinary silence, but silence that speaks. Its word does not come as sound, but as feeling. At such times, a person may sense that each of his thoughts is like a seed that awaits darkness in order to begin its growth. And it is precisely in this period, which seems lifeless, that the greatest potential for spiritual birth is found. Steiner says that winter's darkness is not the enemy of light, but its cradle, the space in which light becomes inward and real. In the human soul, the pressure of the winter weeks opens the door to a remarkable sensitivity, the ability to hear the quiet voice of one's own being. In the deepest winter night occurs what all spiritual traditions call the birth of light. Steiner describes it as the moment when the soul feels that its innermost core does not depend on outer rhythms, but on its own divine source. It is a time when, though surrounded by cold, a person may experience an unexpected warmth, not physical warmth, but the warmth of consciousness arising from within. In these moments, the soul is closest to itself. It is not stretched into vastness, as in summer, nor stirred by spring forces, nor colored by autumn's wisdom. It is bare, yet filled with inner life that is quiet but strong. For the truth is that a person comes to know his own strength most deeply when the outer world gives him nothing. When winter light begins to return, it does not return suddenly, and likewise the soul does not immediately turn outward. In the first weeks of the returning light, a person feels something like inner caution, as if he asks himself, "Will what has been born within me endure the light of day?" And indeed, this is a time of testing, for what was clear in darkness may lose its contours in the light. That is why Steiner emphasizes that the beginning of the year should be spent in thoughtful, calm wakefulness, just as a seed does not emerge from the soil on the very day light becomes stronger. So the thoughts conceived in winter's silence should not be exposed too quickly to outer demands. The soul must feel secure before stepping into spring's dynamism. When spring finally arrives, it does not come only with colors and scents, but with a particular inner charge. The earth exhales, and a person feels this. The soul, which had been contracting for so long, now expands. But this process is not romantic. It is real, alive, powerful. During these weeks, a person may feel ideas approaching him as if carried by the fresh air itself. It is the time when initiatives are born, when decisions come more easily, when courage awakens from within. Yet Steiner warns that this is also the time when a person may fall prey to his own excitement. He may promise more than he can sustain or begin more than he can complete. Spring carries the force of growth, but growth needs guidance. That is why this period calls for a special balance, that a person follow the forces that surge upward, but not allow them to carry him without consciousness. And when the rhythm completes itself in the fullness of summer, the soul again finds itself in a wide state. But now it is different from the winter light. Summer openness is not the birth of inner light, but a filling with outer light. It is the time when a person most strongly feels unity with nature, with people, with events, as if the boundaries of his personality expand. Steiner says that in such a state, a person receives moral intuitions that are not his own. They come from broad cosmic regions. But with this openness comes danger as well. The soul may scatter, may lose its firmness. That is why summer is the time when a person must cultivate consciousness, not against the expansiveness, but within it. For only when the inner center remains awake does the vastness of summer become a blessing rather than a snare. When the summer expansiveness settles into its deepest fullness, a person feels how easily the soul opens to everything living, everything that approaches from the outside. It is the moment when moral intuitions can descend most purely into human consciousness, because the soul is then neither constrained nor closed, but in the state Steiner describes as transparency. Nature is at its loudest and most abundant, yet the human interior, if in harmony with the rhythm, is not loud. It is calm, quiet, capable of receiving impulses that do not arise from individual thoughts, but from spiritual currents shining through the light of summer. In the ancient mysteries, this time of year was reserved for the highest teachings because it was believed that the earth and cosmos meet most powerfully within the human soul at this moment. But this meeting also carries a certain danger. When the soul opens too much, when it spreads out too widely, it can lose its inner firmness. Too much expansiveness can erase inner contours, and the same light that gives inspiration can at the same time blur self-knowledge. Steiner emphasizes that in summer, the soul must hold to its own center more strongly than ever, whereas in winter, it must guard against anxiety, in spring against dispersion, and in autumn against excessive seriousness. In summer, it must guard against excessive expansion. For it easily happens that a person, intoxicated by ease and openness, begins to live more in the outer than in the inner. And then moral intuitions are no longer quiet stars in consciousness, but merely reflections of impressions. That is why summer wisdom has always been the wisdom of balance, to open, but not to lose oneself. And then gradually, the days begin to lose their strength. Yet nature does this with a kind of dignity. The light withdraws, but not abruptly. The warmth decreases, but a person attuned to the rhythm can sense that a special nobility appears in these changes. Autumn never arrives with wildness, but with wisdom, as if everything that summer opened must now be gathered, condensed, transformed into understanding. In this lies one of Steiner's deepest insights. Nature teaches a person not only growth and expression, but also reduction, withdrawal, distinction. While summer says open, autumn says recognize. Recognize what was right, what was necessary, what was merely transient. Recognize what you wish to carry into the future and what must remain behind. Autumn returns everything to its essence. At that moment, the soul becomes serious, but not heavy. It is a seriousness akin to quiet determination. Autumn reigns, the smell of damp earth, the fallen leaves. All of this affects a person not only through the senses, but through his capacity for inner perception. Autumn gives a person the possibility to view the year as a whole, to see his own path reflected in nature's transformation. Steiner says, "In these weeks, a person most easily hears the voice of destiny, because he simultaneously feels both descent and ascent, both ending and beginning. This is the time when a person can most deeply say to himself, 'This I have lived, this I have learned, this I must change.' Nature helps him ensure that in this statement there is neither bitterness nor fear, but only clarity. And as autumn shifts into pre-winter, the soul approaches a state of concentration. It is a period in which thoughts are at their ripest. They are neither awakened like in spring, nor expansive like in summer, nor saturated with feeling like in full autumn. They are simple, precise, true. During this time of year, a person can most easily plan, recognize causes, see consequences. The power of discernment is at its height, and one feels how the inner will gains new strength. For in pre-winter, something begins to be born that will reach its culmination in the deepest winter silence, the sense of an inner foundation. As if beneath the surface of the soul, a quiet firmness is slowly gathering, announcing what will come later, the inner warmth preparing for its own birth. This gathering of pre-winter is essential for understanding the winter birth of light, for it does not occur by accident. It is neither merely a tradition nor a symbol. It is the result of a long process in which a person has followed the rhythms of nature throughout the year and allowed each seasonal influence to imprint itself upon the soul. Then, when everything has become quiet, when there is no more rustling or color, when both day and night seem equally silent, the human being becomes capable of hearing his deepest essence. And out of that silence is born what Steiner calls the inner force of light, a light that does not come from the sun, but from the spirituality that lives within the human being himself. When the deepest moment of winter finally arrives, it brings not only cold and silence, but something a person, if he becomes still, can experience as the purest possibility of transformation. Steiner describes this moment as the state in which the earth is in a complete in-breath, when all its forces are gathered inward, when nothing is dispersed outward, when neither light nor warmth distracts attention. It is the time when the spiritual world draws closest to the earth, but not with noise or force, rather with a silence that is almost sacred. If a person manages to open himself in this period, he can feel that his soul is like untouched snow, quiet, shimmering, ready to receive the imprint of what descends from above. This inner winter light that is born then is not the light of thought, but the light of being. It does not arise because a person thinks, but because he has become transparent to himself. After months of gathering, discerning, and withdrawing, the soul finally discovers that within it there exists a core not subject to seasonal cycles, but of divine origin. This core is always present, but only in winter stillness, when everything has retreated, can it shine. That is why in many spiritual traditions, the midpoint of winter is considered the moment of the birth of light, not only because the days begin to lengthen, but because the soul feels that within itself it carries a light that does not come from nature, but from the spiritual world. When movement outward reappears from within this inner light, it is at first almost imperceptible. Just as a seed does not break through the ground at the very moment life awakens within it, so the soul does not return immediately to full activity. In the first weeks of the year, a person may feel how each thought, each impulse is still in a state of inner softness. This is a time when even small movements carry great importance, for in these moments it is decided whether what was born in silence will truly become part of a human being, or whether, exposed too soon to the fast rhythm of outer life, it will fade like a dream that goes unwritten upon waking. Steiner emphasizes that this period is among the most delicate of the entire year, for it requires quiet wakefulness, not effort, but attentiveness. And then, as the rhythm slowly strengthens, spring arrives with its power of birth. But the one who has gone through the winter path of light experiences spring differently. While others see only budding and blossoming, a person who follows the earth's rhythm sees how the forces that were gathered all winter now begin to overflow into the world. He feels within himself the same force that drives the bud, the same urge toward creation, the same need for expression. But now these forces are no longer unrestrained or random. They emerge from a depth that has become light. That is why, for such a person, spring is not merely a season, but an inner call to act, not out of impulse, but out of inspiration that was born in silence. When the spring forces reach their full strength, they can carry a person like a tide. Ideas multiply, plans expand, the will awakens. It is a time when one easily feels that everything works, because the forces of nature and one's own inner forces flow in the same direction. But at this moment, Steiner gives one of his most important warnings. Precisely when the soul becomes most alive, it needs the greatest wakefulness. For the spring movement can be creative, but it can also be chaotic. The force of growth by itself does not distinguish between the fruitful and the fruitless. That is why spring must not be lived unconsciously. The most fruitful spring actions are always those that carry the echo of winter's light, those infused with the silence from which they arose. And then, after the spring expansion, comes that extraordinary summer state in which the soul feels as if it is hovering between earth and sky. At this moment, a person may experience the deepest sense of belonging to the world. It is as if he ceases to be a separate being and becomes a bridge between the earth that exhales and the cosmos that sends its moral impulses. Steiner says that in such moments, when inner and outer light meet, a person can receive insights unlike any other, insights that do not come from logic, but from a sacred feeling of truth. But he also warns, these insights can be received only if a person does not lose his inner axis. If he opens too much, they pass through him, but do not imprint themselves. But if he remains awake within the vastness, they become a moral force that guides him through the rest of the year. Summer then gradually rounds itself off, and a person, as part of that rhythm, feels himself returning once more into his own being. Openness withdraws, warmth softens, the light lowers, and the soul, which was so spacious, now becomes clear again, focused, ready to see. In these moments autumn begins, the time that carries the wisdom of the whole year, and that will, if a person allows it, draw from him the ripest insights. As the summer's expansiveness finally begins to contract and the first hints of autumn appear in the air, a person feels that something like an inner gathering of experiences is taking place within him. Everything that has grown, everything that has expanded, everything that has been full of life and light now seeks its essence. Autumn does not ask for activity as spring does, nor for openness as summer does. It asks for maturity, and in this lies its quiet but powerful spiritual value. It guides a person toward recognizing the meaning of what he has lived through. Nature no longer offers abundance, but a mirror, and anyone who sincerely turns inward during this time will feel his thoughts becoming more serious, clearer, not colder, but truer. Autumn is the time in which the soul returns to its depth, not as a withdrawn observer, but as a sage who restores meaning to the events of the year. Steiner says that it is precisely in autumn that a person can feel his own biography most deeply. This is because nature at this time shows two final great gestures of the rhythm, releasing what has finished and preserving what has been completed. The leaf falls, but the seed is kept. And the same happens within the human being. The outer strivings that have lost their strength fall away, and the essence remains, what has truly become part of his being. Autumn, therefore, brings a kind of seriousness that is not heaviness, but freedom. Freedom from everything that was transient, unnecessary, inauthentic. In this clearing, the soul discovers its path again. It is a path not planned by thinking, but revealed through an inner sense of necessity. As autumn deepens and moves toward pre-winter, one can feel that a quiet strength has arisen within. It is not the strength felt in spring's inspiration or summer's vastness. It is a strength that comes from the power of discernment. The soul becomes clear, precise, collected. In this period, the wisest thoughts of the year are born because autumn's inner light comes from experience rather than emotion. It is a light that arises from the realization that everything a person lives through is part of a larger process, a rhythm that carries him even when he believes he stands outside nature. Steiner says that in these weeks, the soul can most deeply experience that there is an inner logic to life, a logic that is not cold, but imbued with moral meaning. And then the rhythm draws near once more to the deepest point of the year, winter. But this time, after the full cycle, a person does not approach winter as something sad or dark, but as the moment of greatest inner truth. Winter is now familiar. It is not merely cold and withdrawal, but the space in which everything a person has experienced through the year can be gathered into a single inner ripening. Just as the earth closes itself to protect the seed, so the human soul closes itself to protect truth. This truth is not conceptual, but living. It is the sense that through every movement of the year, from winter to summer, from autumn to spring, a person has been carried by forces older than himself, and yet living within him. In the deepest silence of winter days is born what Steiner considered the greatest possibility of the human soul, the discovery of its own inner light. This is not a light seen with the eyes, nor a light that gives answers. It is a light that gives direction. It appears as the feeling that within a person exists a core that does not decay, does not depend on circumstances, does not disappear through the changes of the seasons. It is a light that was hidden all year, protected, its birth made possible only because the soul faithfully followed the rhythm. For the inner light can be born only when the soul has passed through all the gestures nature contains within itself. Concentration, awakening, openness, wisdom. And so the cycle of the year closes once again. But what is deepest in this entire movement is the fact that by following the rhythms of nature, a person does not lose himself. He finds himself. Nature does not carry him as a passive traveler, but leads him as a teacher. Each seasonal movement gives him a new capacity. Winter gives inner silence, spring gives courage, summer gives inspiration, autumn gives wisdom. And when all of this passes through him, he senses that the rhythm that carried him is actually the rhythm that lives within him. For a human being is not a creature that observes nature from the outside. He is a creature that develops in harmony with its breath. And this breath is not only physical, but spiritual. It shapes him, protects him, transforms him. And if a person once feels this breath, this great, invisible rhythm that carries him, he can never again say that he is alone in the world. For he knows that he lives within a being that breathes, thinks, and loves, and that his own being participates in that great cosmic harmony. This is the gift of the year. This is the gift of rhythm. This is the gift nature offers to the soul.